I led 9 men into St. Mary's Catholic Church in Kampala, Uganda, during Sunday morning Mass with one plan: to grab the consecrated host from the priest's hands, throw it to the ground in front of the entire congregation, and prove in the most direct way I could think of that the Jesus they worshipped had no power to stop us. But the moment my fingers closed around that host, something happened that none of my 9 men, none of the 600 people in those pews, and none of the priests in that building have been able to explain to this day. Have you ever been so completely convinced of something that the moment it was proven wrong felt less like a correction and more like the world itself turning inside out? My name is Yusuf Rashid Al-Nouri. I'm 28 years old, and on the morning of May 12, 2018, I walked 9 men through the main entrance of St. Mary's Catholic Church on Rubaga Road in Kampala, Uganda, during the celebration of Sunday Mass, intending to take the Eucharist from the altar and throw it to the floor in front of every witness in that building. I had no idea that what I planned to throw down was the very thing that was about to bring me to my knees. I grew up in the Kisenyi neighborhood of Kampala, in a Ugandan Muslim community that carried its faith with the density of a people for whom belief had been forged through generations of minority existence in a predominantly Christian country. My father, Sheikh Rashid Musa Al-Nouri, led prayers at the Kisenyi Mosque and was known throughout our area as a man whose knowledge of Islamic law was matched by his willingness to apply it without compromise. He had studied in Egypt in his 30s and returned with a seriousness about the faith that made our household feel, even as a child, like a place where nothing trivial was permitted to occupy space for long. My mother, Amina, ran Quran classes for the children of our neighborhood every morning before school, and I was among her first students before I was old enough to understand what I was memorizing. Faith was not a thing in our home that was separate from everything else. It was everything else. I completed the memorization of the Quran by the age of 15. My father announced it at the Friday prayer, and the congregation prayed over me, and I stood in that moment, feeling that I had become what I had been placed in the world to become. While other boys in Kisenyi spent their afternoons playing football on the rocky ground between the houses or running to the market, I was studying Arabic grammar and sitting in study circles at the mosque 3 evenings each week. I fasted every Ramadan from the age of 9 without anyone needing to ask me to. I added voluntary fasts on Mondays and Thursdays before I was 12. I prayed every prayer in its time without exception. I was not doing any of this for approval. I did it because the faith felt like the truest and most solid thing in my life, and I was not willing to give it less than my full weight. My father taught me about Christianity with the precision he brought to everything. The message given to the Prophet Isa had been altered by men who did not understand what they had received. The Trinity was a theological construction with no basis in original revelation. And the Eucharist, bread declared to be the literal body of Jesus Christ, was the most elaborate form of shirk he could point to. By 19, I had joined the Muslim student organization at Makerere University, whose real energy was directed toward countering Christian influence in Kampala's Muslim communities. We organized outside churches, challenged church expansion near mosques, confronted missionaries in our neighborhoods. I believed this work was as much a part of my faith as prayer itself. By 27, I had completed a degree in business administration and was working as an operations manager at a logistics company in the industrial district. I was engaged to a woman named Mariam, the daughter of a well-known Islamic scholar in Mengo, a woman of a steady faith and sharp intelligence, who I had known for 3 years and whom my family considered the ideal match. We were to be married the following December. I had everything that the life I had been raised into was supposed to produce: stability, community, direction, a faith that had never been seriously shaken. Ask yourself this question: have you ever stood so completely inside the life you built that you could not see its edges, could not see where it ended and where everything you had never considered began. The trigger arrived in April of 2018. A member of our organization, Brother Dawood, brought a printed announcement to one of our meetings. St. Mary's Church on Rubaga Road was holding a special Mass for the Feast of the Ascension, and the announcement described the Eucharist as the body and blood of Christ, truly present. Brother Dawood set the paper down and said, a church in the middle of Kampala was publicly declaring it possessed the living God in a piece of bread, and no one in our community was answering it. The plan formed over 2 meetings. We would attend the Mass, I would go to the altar at communion and throw the host to the ground. Let the congregation watch. Let the silence of the bread prove what we knew. I volunteered without hesitation. I had no idea that the God I intended to dishonor had already placed my name on a list, not for punishment, but for something I had no category for yet. I selected 8 men over the following 3 weeks. Hamid, a fellow student from my university years whose theological knowledge made him a sharp presence in any argument. Bilal, whose family had operated a shop beside the church compound for years and who carried a steady low resentment about it. Nasser, my closest friend since secondary school, who had accompanied me into every serious commitment of my adult life. We visited St. Mary's twice as ordinary visitors, mapping the nave, the altar approach, the ushers' positions. During communion, the priest would stand at the foot of the altar steps distributing the host. We would enter during that distribution, move down the center aisle, and I would reach him before anyone could respond. The plan felt watertight. Have you ever been so certain you were doing righteous work that doubt felt less like wisdom and more like weakness? The night before, I prayed tahajjud at 2 a.m, asking Allah for steadiness and a voice that would carry. When I sat back, something was different in the room. A weight in the air that had not been there. A pressure in the center of my chest, quiet and insistent, the way a truth you have not yet accepted is insistent. I named it Shaitan. I lay down and barely slept before Fajr. We arrived at St. Mary's on Rubaga Road at 9:30 on a Sunday morning in May. The sky above Kampala was the deep, even blue of the dry season. Families moved up the stone steps in their Sunday clothes. An usher pressed an order of service into my hands with a quiet welcome, and I went inside. The smell of the interior reached me immediately. Incense and wood polish and candle wax layered into something dense and old, with no equivalent in any other building I had entered. The ceiling was high and vaulted. Stained glass sent amber and green light across the stone floor. The pews were almost full. 600 people settled and a low hymn moving through the space from every direction. The altar stood elevated on 3 steps, dressed in white, 2 candles burning with steady disinterest in anything around them. A young woman in the 3rd row had her eyes closed and her hands folded, and the completeness of her stillness produced a discomfort I pushed away immediately. I kept my eyes on the altar. The priest elevated the host at 10:20. I stood. My men stood with me. 9 of us rising from the pews and moving into the center aisle, walking fast and direct toward the altar. The congregation felt us before they understood us. A wave of turned heads, a sound of confusion moving through the rows. A woman somewhere behind me who made a short, sharp sound and pulled her child close. An usher on the right side of the nave stepped into the aisle. He looked at us coming, and then he did something I was not prepared for. He stepped back, bowed his head, and began to pray quietly where he stood. He did not try to stop us. He prayed. The priest at the altar watched us coming, and he did not lower the host, and he did not move, and his expression was not fear, and it was not surprise, and it was not anger. It was something I had no word for then, and have struggled to name accurately since. The face of a person who is fully present, fully prepared, and completely unafraid. An elderly woman in the front pew turned to face me as I came level with her and said in Swahili, in a voice so calm it seemed to belong to a different kind of moment than the one we were in. Jesus already loves you, son. He knows exactly why you are here. I went past her. I reached the altar step. I extended my hand toward the host. That is when it happened. The moment that changed everything I believed about God. The heat arrived in my fingers before I made contact, not from the priest's hands, from the direction of the host itself, moving toward me, entering through my fingertips and traveling up through my palm and wrist and forearm and settling in my chest as something that had no name in my vocabulary. Not warmth in the ordinary sense, not pain, but a fullness, the physical experience of encountering something so much larger and more certain than myself that every argument I had carried into that building became briefly and completely visible as the small things they had always been. My hand reached the host and my fingers would not close. I could feel the bread. I could feel the weight of it, real and ordinary in its texture, flour and water, exactly what I had come to prove it was, and I could not take it. My hand was open against it, and it would not respond to what I was telling it to do. I looked at the host. The light was interior and sourceless, white and gold at the center of the bread, producing rather than reflecting, steady in a way that candle flames are not steady. Hamid, directly behind my right shoulder, said afterward that he saw it before he fell. Nasser said the light was the last clear thing he saw before his legs gave out beneath him. One by one, I heard my men going to the floor behind me. Not a sound of violence or panic, but the soft, successive sound of people whose bodies have made a decision ahead of their minds. 9 men going to their knees on the stone floor of St. Mary's Church, while I was still standing with my open hand against the host and my arm refusing every instruction I sent it. And then the knowing came. Not external, not a voice in the room. Something that moved through the heat in my chest the way a name moves through a crowd. Specific, unmistakable, already addressed to you before it arrives. I know you, Yusuf. Every fast, every night prayer, every time you knelt in the dark and reached towards something without knowing its name. I know you, and I have loved you the whole time, and you have come to exactly the right place. My knees went. I did not fall dramatically. My legs simply stopped holding me, and I was on the stone floor, and the tears were already there before I understood where they were coming from. Not grief, not shame, something so much larger than either of those. A recognition, a meeting, the feeling of arriving somewhere after a very long journey that you had not known you were on. I was weeping without any ability to moderate it on the floor of a Catholic church in Kampala, and I did not want to stop. Around me, my 9 men were on the floor. The congregation was completely still. Then one voice began, a low, steady prayer from somewhere in the middle of the pews, and another joined it, and within moments the whole church was praying together, 600 people in a sound that carried nothing of triumph and nothing of shock, only the quiet, continuous sound of people who have been holding a door open for a long time and are watching someone finally walk through. The priest came down from the altar. He knelt on the stone beside me and put his hand on my back and waited until my breathing steadied enough for me to hear him. He said it quietly and directly, for me alone. He loves you, son. He has been waiting for you. Ask yourself this question. How do you explain the moment the God you came to dishonor calls you by name and tells you he has been waiting for exactly this? When I could stand, I asked the priest what I was supposed to do now. He helped me to my feet. Hamid was beside me. Nasser was beside me. 3 other men remained in the building. The priest led us to the front of the nave and he prayed with us. And in that prayer, I said the most honest words I have ever spoken. Jesus, I came here today to throw you to the ground. I have been wrong about you my entire life, and I understand now that I did not know it. I know you are real. I know you were real before I arrived, and you will be real long after I leave. Forgive me for everything I brought to this altar today. Take everything I thought I was. I give it all to you. 5 of my men gave their lives to Jesus Christ that morning on the floor of St. Mary's Church in Kampala. I was baptized 6 weeks later and given the name Andrew because the priest told me Andrew was the one who ran immediately to bring others to Jesus the moment he found him himself, and that he believed that would be my story. Ask yourself this question. Have you ever received a name that described not who you had been, but who you were about to become? I had no idea what carrying that name was going to require me to release. My father's voice on the phone was controlled in the way that very quiet rage is controlled. Each word placed down carefully because he knew that raised voices were beneath what the moment required. You are no longer my son. You are dead to this family and to everything the name Al-Nuri has meant in this city. Do not contact us again. My mother did not call. She sent my sister to collect my remaining belongings from the family house, and my sister stood at my door with the box and looked at a point somewhere over my left shoulder and said nothing and left. Mariam's father ended the engagement by letter. Mariam sent one message in Luganda, I don't recognize you anymore, and then nothing. The organization I had served for 8 years issued a formal statement declaring me apostate. My employer's company ran through community connections and I was let go within 6 weeks. I received communications serious enough that remaining in Kampala became a practical question, and I left the city 4 months after my baptism. I lost my father, my mother, my fiancé, my community, my work, and the city I had lived in my entire life, all of it in less than a year. But I gained everything that truly matters. I gained Jesus Christ, which means forgiveness I had not earned, peace with no condition attached to it, and a love so steady it has never varied based on what I brought to it on any given day. I gained a church family who cared for me in the specific, unglamorous daily ways that love shows itself when it is real. I met a woman named Rebecca 14 months after my baptism at a Pentecostal church in Entebbe where I had resettled. She was a teacher, the daughter of a Ugandan pastor, and she asked better questions than anyone I had met in a conversation about faith. We were married at St. Mary's Church on Rubaga Road. I returned for that because it was the only right place. The priest who had knelt on the floor beside me officiated. 3 of the men who had fallen at that altar with me stood as my groomsmen. I had no idea when I stood at that altar as a groom how many times I would return to that same spot in the years that followed to bring others to meet the Jesus who had met me there. Rebecca and I have a son. His name is Emmanuel, God with us, because that is the most accurate description of everything that has happened since that morning in May. I now carry the testimony of Jesus to Muslim communities across Uganda and East Africa, and in diaspora communities in Europe. I had no idea on the morning I walked into St. Mary's to throw down what was on that altar that more than 70 Muslims would come to faith in Christ through hearing what happened on that floor. I still write to my parents at Eid and at Christmas. I have received no reply. I pray for them with the same faithfulness they first gave me, and I trust that the God who found me on a stone floor in Kampala is entirely capable of finding them. I return to that altar once more, standing in the exact place where my hand had been open against the host and my knees had given way. I placed both hands on the altar step and stayed for a long time. The man who walked through those doors with contempt for what was on that altar no longer exists. In his place stands a follower of Jesus Christ who would surrender every earthly thing again before denying the name of the one who met him at that altar and called him by name. If Jesus can love someone like me, a man who came to his altar to throw him to the ground, then there is no story you are carrying that places you outside his reach. No matter what you have done or where you come from, the same Jesus who held my hand open at that altar and broke me open on that floor is present right now, in this moment, reaching through this testimony toward whatever in you is most certain and most closed. He is not asking you to have less history before you come. He is not waiting for a simpler version of you to arrive first. Look inside your own heart right now. Jesus is calling you right now, not at some future moment when conditions are more favorable, but in this exact breath, in this exact place. Will you open your hand and let him show you what I found when I finally did?